My name is Friedenberg, and it's a great pleasure today to be interviewing my very good friends Stanley and Hermine Rosin on this date, February 15th, 1987. You will find us chatting in the home of Mr. and Mrs. Stanley Rosin. I'm so glad to be here. Tell me, Stan, what brought you to Palm Springs originally?
Well, I fell in love with the hotel business at Catalina Island, and of course that's a summer resort. So after the summer was over, I felt I had to find something that would be able to sustain me for the year round. So I looked for a winter resort, and I'd heard of Florida and I've heard of Hawaii, but this was back in 1933, 4, 5 when the Depression was on. So finally I heard a friend of mine told me about Palm Springs, and he said, you must go out there and see Palm Springs. So he gave me general directions on how to get here through San Bernardino and up the little narrow road that ran out to the desert. So one August of 1935, I drove out here, and it took me about 3 hours to traverse the distance. And as I drove down what is now Palm Canyon Drive, which was then, I think, Main Street, you could have shot a cannonball down the street. There wasn't a car, soul, a dog, or a cat in sight. And I finally found one man in a small real estate shack, a wooden shack, where Robinson's is now located on Palm Canyon Drive in Topless. And it was Pearl McManus's husband, Austin. And he told me, he said, you'd better come back in September or October. He says, there's nobody here during the summertime. The town was totally closed up where the downtown section is now. There was a small restaurant with a wire screen in porch that was full of sand, and later became the Chi-Chi. And I could see that this was not the place for me in the summertime. I didn't even see one palm tree, by the way, in this entire visit. And so when I came back in September, I visited Hermine at Highland Springs of all places. We had nothing to do with Highland Springs in those days.
Were you married at that point?
No, not at all. We had just met not too many years before. So I came down and liked what I saw. They were just building the Wellness building, not the Wellness building,
the Plaza and the Cornell building.
Cornell building. And there was a church on that corner, and they had demolished the church. And I met Zadie Bunker, who had the property directly across the street. And she had 3 little bungalows in back of her what was then the theater. And I managed to lease the 3 little bungalows from her, calling them the Stanley Cottages for want of a better name. And I served as a night watchman on the Cornell building.
That's where the corner opposite the Fashion Plaza now.
Oh,
it's where Joel's is now, and
Florsheim Shoe Store.
Florsheim Shoes,
and Harry Williams was the architect, Stu Williams' father. And so I became the night watchman on the job. Anyway, that's how I happened to come to Palm Springs. I liked what I saw. It was delightful, beautiful weather, no traffic to speak of. It had tennis courts, and there was a swimming pool I could use at the Del Tacos Hotel. And so that's what brought me here.
What was your feeling, Hermine? How soon after did you arrive?
Well, we had known one another. Actually, yesterday, on the 14th of February, was the 50th anniversary of our engagement announcement.
Oh, lovely.
But we had been going together for about 4 years, and it was the height of the Depression, so we didn't jump into marriage and just know everything was going to be fine. We had to wait. So when we were married in May and we went to Catalina, that was familiar territory. But coming down here, we lived on the edge of the desert, catty-corner to what is now the Hilton Riviera Hotel. There was nothing but sand and the Racket Club between us and Beaumont. And I was in love, and that everything was fine. But when I got settled in, it was very lonely. There were no young people near me, near our age or our ilk of any kind, and it got so awful with windstorms and the dust, and I thought, if I didn't love that man so much, I would go back to the city. I just don't think I'm going to like this.
The marriage almost broke up when a field mouse jumped out of the garbage can.
But anyhow, after that first year of breaking in, we went over to Catalina. I found myself in the middle of the next summer wishing we were back there, and I love the dunes and the sunset, and sun rises more than the sunset, but the glow, and gradually learned to love it.
Were there any other people here at that point in time that were of the Jewish faith as you are?
Yes, there were a few. Leo Baker and Sam Stewart, Annie Baker and Cecile, and the Matloffs, Irvin, Bess Matloff were here.
Annette. Annette and Jack Freeman.
Annette and Jack Freeman, and Tom Lips. I think that, and Saul Ruskin, who would come down and was an attorney for the Lips.
What action or event would you say really started to solidify, if that's the correct word, Jewish life in Palm Springs?
Well, I think that was brought about by the war, when a number of people in the service discovered Palm Springs because they were in the Patton's army out here in the desert trading, and they would come into Palm Springs for the weekends, and or they had their wives living here while they were in training, and they discovered this paradise. And so when the war was over, the families began to settle here. Dr. George Kaplan came here from New York. He had been at the Torney Hospital, and decided that once he had broken up his practice back there, that it was important to decide where he wanted to live and how he could better himself. So he was one, for example, who came because of the exposure during the war.
Was that during? Was it during the war that the Mirador Hotel was used as a hospital?
Yes, I can vouch for
yes.
that.
Would you tell me
World
something
War
about what
II
occurred
was
there?
called Torney General Hospital, and they brought a lot of cases from the South Pacific primarily, but they were coming in from all over, and they had a great need for gray ladies. And Philip Boyd and his wife were very active, and she was the head of the Red Cross Gray Ladies recruiting. She came to the hotel one day and asked me to become a gray lady, which necessitated training and being away X number of hours a week. And I accepted, and I tramped up and down all of those wooden floors and all of the acres and acres of horrendous cases that they were treating. And there were requests for Jewish services and Jewish home hospitality, and there was no organized anything at that time for that. So would you like me to tell you what happened?
Absolutely.
When in the middle of World War II, there were about 75 men, servicemen in the hospital of Jewish faith, and they asked us. There was the nucleus of a Jewish women's cultural group, started by three marvelous older women, Mrs. Charles Bonoff, Mrs. Gussie Fleischman, and Mrs. Ruth Nussbaum. And they were identified with Youth Aliyah. And they whatever little money they made, they would, from the group, they would send it there. But we had primarily book reviews and cultural discussions. But then when I was active in Torney and they requested home hospitality, we realized there had to be a larger group. So it became the Jewish Women's Group at that time, and we enlarged cultural and social and international and community needs. And the first Jewish action, I think, was picnics out in what is now Tamara's Country Club. That was the Wonder Date Palm Hotel. That's where we had our picnic.
That must have seemed so far out at that point.
Oh, it's a long way. It took a half an hour to get there, through the sand and the wash.
And then we had seders at their request. One seder, and my feet still hurt when I think about the seder. We had it commercially prepared, but we were serving 75 servicemen and their families, some of them really on gurneys, not able to be ambulatory. So that was the beginning of the need.
Tell me, from that activity, and obviously a need that you fulfilled so beautifully, how did a more formal organization of Jewish life evolved?
Well, I think it was quite obvious that as more and more people began to settle here, that we needed an education for the children. And so the Sunday school was in order, and this house became the first Sunday school.
Well, may I read something?
Yes,
I knew you
absolutely.
might ask that question, and it said the Jewish Community Center, as it now...
You're reading from the...
I'm reading from the very first dedication book in the year 1951, when the center itself was dedicated. And I was very interested
touching.
in the history. I was a little foggy on it until I reread it. As the outgrowth of the efforts of two organizations, the Palm Springs Jewish Women's Group and the Thursday Night Men's Club. The Jewish Women's Group came in during the war years of 44 to 45, and they felt the need of participation as a group in local, national, international welfare and cultural projects, as I just said. The women's group, under the leadership of its presidents, myself, Ruth Rich, Bobby Cullah, and Ann Baker, had a productive program. During the first 2 years, they had fundraising, for, as I said, for Youth Aliyah, and then the women expanded to a lot more of their funds to endeavor cooperating with the men's group, and eventually with the center board. Through the tireless efforts of Mrs. Hermine Rich, who was then president after me, the first Jewish religious school was organized in the fall of '46 under the auspices of the women. And she worked closely with the Hebrew congregation and with the Rabbi Alfred Wolf, and they spent a great deal of time in teaching Mrs. Rich and Mrs. Julius Yale, who was an early settler here with us.
Before we get ahead of the story, hold right there for 1 minute, and let's just see if you can tell us from your personal experiences what occurred with that men's group when you first started.
Well, but it goes on to say that the original classes were right here where we're sitting.
Right in this room.
Yeah, well, there was one in this room, one in the middle living room, and one on the front porch, which was a separate porch at that time.
3 classes.
So we have 3 classes.
And the women were the
And
teachers.
it was interesting because really part of it became almost a babysitting arrangement, because the parents would forget to pick them up until 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and we managed to run a nursing home.
And they turned off our electricity once, and unbeknown to me, and defrosted a dessert for company I prepared, and they were a little
Those were fun days.
but they were
Really,
great, and we're
marvelous.
glad we had it.
Well, as far as the men were concerned, the women were outdoing them, and there was a demand put on them to, you fellas have got to do something to assist in this program. So we met one evening at a home just near the Jewish Community Center where it's built is now, and organized what is now known as the Jewish Community Center Men's Club. At the time, there was a little concern about the development of a Jewish men's club in Palm Springs. There were some hotels that were restrictive, and the Jewish men were sensitive to this, and didn't want to wave some red flags and create any problems. So they were concerned about being a Jewish organization particularly, and yet they didn't feel the necessity to get together. So rather than settle on a Jewish temple, synagogue type of approach, they decided they were going to just organize a social club, and it became the Thursday Night Club. And it was the focal point of the community. It was a gathering of the men, and made way for the eventual participation of the men in many ways, both social and civic and financial help in the development of the Jewish Community Center and all the...
Did you meet in different homes on Thursday nights?
No, we met generally in one home. It happened to be what was then Barney Ostro's home, which is the home that is still there on Aleo, just across the street from the Jewish Community Center. And I became the first president of the men's group of the Jewish Community. And from that, then the pressure began to build for the need for better facilities and a private home.
You mean Hermine decided she didn't want children all the time?
No, not really. It just got too big.
I think it was quite a
grew.
mutual feeling, and I think there were some 15 or 20 children, I've forgotten just how many, but it was more than we felt could be properly handled in a private home. And so Erwin Schulman at that time, who owned the Chi-Chi, had owned a piece of property on South Palm Canyon Drive where the thrifty drugstore is presently. And it was just a large vacant piece of property, except it had an old house on it. And the old house was really a new structure that had never been completed. It was a woman from Montana who had come to Palm Springs and loved riding horses and had, how many wolfhounds did
I
she
don't know
have?
how many Russian wolfhounds.
And she built herself started to build herself a beautiful home with 4 or 5 foot thick cement walls, because those were the only ways in those days that you could create an air-conditioned protection from the hot sun. So, but the house never got completed. The roof over the living room had never been covered over, and the only thing that had been completed was the series of bedrooms that were built around the living room. And she felt that when the land boom started in Palm Springs and people from all the way from San Diego were coming in here to buy land, that this town was getting overcrowded. Well, this was
48,
47.
Overcrowded
in 48?
47.
And so she left town, went back to Montana, and took all of her dogs and abandoned the property, or I should say sold it to her when she was. Well, he was kind enough to let us use the rooms, the guest rooms around this facility, which needed a lot of painting and a lot of cleaning. And pigeons had roosted in the loft over the living room and the kitchen and had made a horrible mess of things everywhere else around there. But this men's club now was called upon, and they proceeded to volunteer weekends and went down there and cleaned it all up and made a very comfortable and useful facility out of these rooms.
But dear, you're making it sound much too lovely. The kids referred to it as Spook Haven because the pigeons were still there and still dropping, and the parents who had allergic children were upset, and we had to pacify everybody, and it wasn't easy always.
No, but the volunteer effort was very satisfying, because everybody went down and painted and cleaned up and did things that they're not normally part of their act. But then this washed over into the same type of participation when it came to building the temple and painting some of the rooms in the temple when it was finished, the classrooms particularly. And so from that, the feeling of more people in the community, more children in the community, that it was time for us to be thinking about a permanent home and something a lot nicer than what we were presently using.
Stan, how did you decide to raise the money to build the building?
Well,
Well, we should say, dear, that we were meeting in different homes for Friday night services, because by that time we had 30, 40 families, and they were asking, where is the Jewish Center in this community? And there really wasn't any. It was in homes and people who knew how to do and where to find things for newcomers.
well, we were borrowing on the services of the Reformed congregation in Los Angeles for our rabbis, and they would come out on Friday night and perform the service. They were very helpful. And,
but we had a different rabbi or a different counter or a different someone every week, so there was no ongoing one person. We were very fortunate. They were kind enough to come out.
we were fortunate too to have Mrs. Littman, who offered her home, which was a beautiful Moroccan-style home in the Las Palmas area.
Stan, is that the home that has the pagoda?
It has a turret.
Arabic
sort of an
turret,
turret.
turret, yeah.
And
I think it's on Money.
it also had a swimming pool, which everybody called a mikveh. And so that's how the enthusiasm grew for a very important, comfortable facility. And then we decided to embark on a program. And the first effort, of course, was to buy a lot. And it was somewhat difficult to decide where that should be. There were some of us who felt that it should be exactly where it is, because it was in a nice, quiet area, neighborhood. It was near a Catholic church, which was already had been established. It was across from the O'Donnell Golf Course. And yet there were homes around it, which was in a residential section, which meant that we'd have to get zone changes and approvals from the neighbors. And then there was the other school who felt that we should be out in some open, more sizable area out on the desert that would give us greater room for expansion. But in those days, Ramon Road and the access to the greater area of expansion was not very encouraging to go through the dusty and little narrow dirt roads to get out there. So we opted to buy this 2-acre parcel that we're presently on. And Reuben Fleet owned that property at the time, and he was very, very supportive. And I think he made us a very fair price, and we were able to by volunteer contributions to buy the lot from him. That was an important step because it gave us a site and a place in which to formally operate and point to it as this is where it's going to be. And I think many people were pleased with that site, and still are.
How did you determine what type of architecture, what architect to select?
This is a story in itself.
Oh, please, that's what we're here for. It's fun.
Here again, we felt that local architects were very capable, particularly a man by the name of Stuart Williams, and we had seen him build other things in the community. In fact, as I say, I had worked on a building he and his father had designed, the Carnell building. So we knew that they were capable builders and our architects. So we engaged his services. But then there was the concern of some of the more orthodox people in the community, and there were a few older, mostly older people really, rather than us youngsters in those days, that felt that we should have something more traditional. Now, what Jewish traditional architecture is, nobody seemed to know. So we made a number of trips to San Bernardino and to Pomona and to
Long Beach,
San Pedro to see what the other people felt was traditional Jewish architecture. Well, it happened to be Moroccan rather
Byzantine.
than Byzantine. And really, there was no such thing as so-called Jewish architecture, but that's what they felt more comfortable with. And then, of course, another element of our problem was that we wanted to build it as the lady did with the old house, of thick block and hollow tile construction, so that we could have it somewhat comfortable in the hot weather. And that was the only thing that was available to accomplish that in those days. There was no refrigeration. There was swamp coolers and that sort of thing, but no refrigeration. So we knew that the structure had to be substantial and it had to have a character. And we had seen buildings built here in Palm Springs.
So we had plenty of characters.
that utilized hollow tile block and were very attractive. But the gentlemen who were surprised and that we would be using such a mundane type of material for something that they use it for, like warehouses and garages back in the East, couldn't conceive of an attractive temple or being built out of that kind of a material. So there was a give and take that almost divided the community in two until we could decide how we were going to utilize the architectural design and utilize the material that we were planning to use. But it so happened that we only had about 25 people at the time who had to make this decision. And so I sort of took the bull by the horns, and finally we had to make a decision because time was getting by. And we proceeded, somewhat over the objections of the older people, who then left in May, and we started building, it was in June. But when they came back in September, they were very pleased to see the beautiful building that had been completed in that time.
What was the financial goal for that type of...
That's what I was going to say. Just doing it sounds great, but we really had a lot of work to do and a lot of fundraisers. No different than now, but just a more simplistic time of living down here. And we had one big money raiser, once again out at the Wonder Palm Date Ranch. That was now the Wonder Palm Hotel. And we had that remarkable Dr. Max Nussbaum, who was quite a renowned speaker, and he came down, and our goal was $55,000 to start the building. And we started out after a lovely dinner with all of the appeals that you are accustomed to, as we all know. And I think you should tell them about that one man who was an incredible story.
It was a marvelous evening. Everybody was very enthusiastic and a lot of excitement and a lot of toasting. And we were getting this program on the road. So we started out, and Rabbi Nussbaum gave a very, incidentally he was from Los Angeles, and gave a very moving, stirring speech about how important it is to have that type of facility here in the community. And we started out and raised 15, 20, 25, got to 30 after an hour's time of haranguing and
not haranguing, appealing.
Appealing, I would say, yeah. And we got up to, we kept asking one gentleman who, that we hadn't heard from. And he said, oh, wait, he says, I'll make my contribution, just wait. Be patient. So we went on for another 5,000, 7,000, 8,000, got up to 42,000. We asked him again. And no, wait, he says, I'm not ready. He says, I'll be there, but don't rush me. So we got up to $48,500. And somebody said to this gentleman, who had then fallen asleep by this time, and he nudged him real hard. And said, now make your pledge. So he says, I'll make up the difference. Well, it so happened that the difference was either $1,500 or $2,500 instead of $500 that he thought it was. And that evening on the way home, I think his wife gave him a holy hallelujah for making such a magnanimous gift to close off the evening. But it created a great sense of accomplishment, and everybody went home very well satisfied that we had raised our $50,000, and so it gave us enough money, cash on hand, to proceed with the building, which incidentally was just the one structure without the sanctuary, which was housed the schoolrooms and had a beautiful open patio and some offices.
If I were to walk into the temple today, would that first structure be those small library room to the right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And
the classrooms around the patio.
Yes. And the most easterly portion of the building was a U-shaped classroom area around an open patio that was exposed to the street. And then it wasn't very long after that we decided that we needed more facility. Now we were getting Friday night services, and the need for
Still with the rotating rabbi stand?
Well,
no,
by this time now we had hired Rabbi Block, and we had some difficulty in securing a rabbi who would perform both Orthodox, Reformed, and Conservative services, because being a community of maybe 50 people,
50 families, really.
50 families, there was no way that we could decide on one or the other, or we would have 30 families or 20 families. There weren't that many Orthodox people in the community at that time, but we still wanted to accommodate them in their beliefs and their method of worship. So we decided that I had to make that decision that we were going to have all free services in the same temple, which was an unheard of thing in those days.
I think it's still extremely
it was a rare
everybody
happening.
questioned how it could possibly be done, because sometimes
it wouldn't work.
you had to wear a yarmulke, or you didn't wear a yarmulke, or you wore a tallis, or you didn't wear a tallis, whether you read from the Reformed prayer book or from the Conservative prayer book. And we managed to resolve those problems by alternating services, Reformed on one Friday night and Conservative on the following Friday night.
Did you have different rabbis representing the different branches of Judaism?
No, we did not. We had our Rabbi Block conducted all, and each rabbi since has done that very, very thing. And we were able to accomplish that. And so far for these years it has worked very well.
After that, I think we had two other rabbis, Rabbi Leibowitz and Rabbi Rosenberg,
yes.
And then Joe Hurwitz, who has been with us ever since. He has a lifetime contract, so we haven't had to make any changes, fortunately.
No, that's
But
right.
they've each been able to handle this three-way system, and
It's unique,
sort of a unique system, and yet it's it has received recognition, I think, throughout the United States.
When you first arrived, as you think back, did you meet with uncomfortable feelings from others because perhaps you were of a faith that was not certainly in the majority in this area?
Yes, to be very honest, as a young bride I was very sad because I wasn't accustomed to being isolated. And there were a few young people, but I wasn't included because I was Jewish, not as what I was, but because, quote, I was Jewish. And fortunately, I was busy enough with our little new business, and then the next year a baby, and then, you know, life went on, and the war changed it all because of what the war was. But it was lonely, and it was disturbing to me because I'd been in a very open, multiracial experience. I went out with new people and mixed with, as did Stan, in our schooling and in our social lives, and to come here to be excluded from a hotel or a restaurant, perhaps in the hotel because our name wasn't Jones or Smith. It was a disturbing thing to us, but we held our heads up quite high, I must say, and Stan worked within what he could work with, which was the Chamber of Commerce, and he was the one who suggested putting little cactus pots on top of the street signs, and they said, "Oh, that's a good suggestion, you do it." So he wound up putting all these little cactus plants.
But there were no street signs. We had
to put street signs up before you put the
there
cactus.
were no street signs in town, so when I made the suggestion that we ought to have street signs in town, the Chamber said, "Fine, you do it." The Chamber was the governing body of the town at that time. There was no city organization.
Well, there was
no, there was not.
Council. What was
no, it wasn't,
Pop
not yet.
Shannon and that group?
That was prior to that.
Oh.
So anyway, that plus, I almost got run out of town once.
Well, tell us about that, for sure.
Well, I made the suggestion at the Chamber of Commerce that the post office should put a mailbox down at each end of town, down at the far end on Ramon Road and one up on top Tamarisk here, which is the extreme end of town almost. So that people wouldn't have to double park their cars to run into Licken's store where the post office was located in the middle of town and double park and block the street. Well, somehow or other it got in the paper, and I got phone calls. I said, "What are you trying to do, Mr. Rosin?" He said, "Don't you know that's the nicest thing we do all day long is to go to the post office and get our mail and meet all our friends there and learn what's going on in town." He said, "You're going to destroy the last vestige of the local community."
At the point in time that you were developing this wonderful temple and really solidifying Jewish life for those of us that came long after, was the same thing happening with churches of other faiths? Were they also growing and going through the same period of...
Oh, I think so.
Definitely.
There were really just two other churches at that time that I recall. One was the community church and the Catholic church. And I'm sure they were experiencing the same kind of growth.
Well, from there, many different faiths have since come.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing I think about our development of the Jewish Community Center in Palm Springs was, as I said before, there was some sensitivity by the local Jewish community in coming into Palm Springs with a synagogue, and the feeling that the men and women were sensitive to the concern in the community. But yet when we went out to actually raise funds for the construction of it, and because of, I think, the groundwork that we had laid with the relationship of personalities and individuals in the community, and I'm speaking about everybody, all the Jewish people in the community, who had relationships with the local community, business people, and the Chamber of Commerce and other organizations. When we developed this book to raise funds for the construction, you'll find names in this book of people who might have felt were anti-Semitic or who had no regard for the growth of a Jewish community in this area that contributed very sizable pages.
Stan, you were telling us about some of the people that surprisingly became very supportive for the efforts for building the temple.
Well, rather interestingly enough, some of our prominent Jewish people who have lovely homes in the Las Palmas area in those days were wondering why we needed a Jewish community center in Palm Springs. And so we were called upon to answer to them, why do we? Because so many people came out of Los Angeles hoping to get away from charities and get away from the general demand on them from Jewish organizations. And they wondered why we were developing the very thing that they came away from here in the midst of Little Palm Springs. And so we had it wasn't an obstacle, because it was just a matter of education. It was a question of convincing them that we had a need and that they should help us. And they did. Not in a large measure financially, but eventually they came into all the fundraising over a number of years towards supporting the activities of the Jewish Community Center and the fundraising efforts. But as I said, the local community that sometimes where we had found resistance to accepting Jewish members or Jewish patrons became very supportive, and even in the book you'll find names such as the tennis club, which in those days had some problems of restrictions, and Pearl and Austin McManus helped us to fund this temple, which I think is a very significant accomplishment, because it helped to generate an idea of liberalism, and that the town was really growing, and that all faiths and types of individuals are going to be coming here. And of course, in those days, it was important to bring new people to the community, and with those new people came the Jewish people. They found it as enticing as anybody else did. So it was a very heartening to see many of the contributors to this program, or I should say, what would you call it?
Dedication
book. Were donors and were supportive. Charlie Farrell helped us break ground, and we had Rabbi Magnin from Los Angeles come out for the specific occasion, which we thought was very generous of him.
About how many people would you say were in attendance at that groundbreaking?
The groundbreaking only had probably 25 people. It was a rainy day.
Well, the wives and the husbands came.
The building committee and a few of those. So it wasn't a dedication. I would say that we had probably 50 families by the time the building was finished, completed, and so there are pictures of the groundbreaking, and there weren't a lot of people there.
Is this book in, one would say, the archives of the Jewish Community Center?
It should be. I have 2 or 3 copies, and I'm sure they have a number of them.
But we could check and make sure that it is.
Perhaps there should be one in the library. I don't know if there is one there or not.
I would certainly think so. I think it's a marvelous
Well,
document.
it has excellent pictures of some of the early people who were involved, and some of the early business people who were advertising it.
Would you be kind enough to just hold up the book, and let's perhaps...
Oh, well, some of them are, these pictures are here, but may I call off some of the names?
Yes.
Well, let's see. Well, here is the dedication, of course. Leo Baker and Charles Farrell, and Rabbi Pressman, and the Catholic priest at that time, with Rabbi Magnin. Some of the people who are pictured here of our members are Rosalind Yale, whose son went to school there. Madeline Ruskin, who still lives here. She was the Sunday school chairman from 48 to 51. And some of the youngsters here at the Littman home before we had the building. There is Joni, at that time, Joni Baker, and her cousin Myrna Stewart, and the Blau boy, and oh goodness, some of these names are the Dobkins boy, and well, I think that's about all that most people would recognize at this point. But this goes on and on with different people. There's a picture here of Ann Baker and Leo that you really,
must
I would
see.
love to show you if I can find it quickly. I don't know whether it's here
in the front.
in the forward part. Okay,
Yes,
we'll
they were
try
there.
that.
And
Okay.
before we
Here's Leo.
close, I want to make sure that after I ask you a few questions, if you'd be willing, I'd love to have the dedication that you wrote for the book, Stan.
May I read it
Yes,
for him?
absolutely.
Well, here's the picture.
Yeah.
Here's Ann Baker and Emil Laufer, who still lives here, and of course Ann. Some of these men are gone now, but they were all active. We could go on and on. There are some pretty familiar names still. Herman Rich and Max Groen, Saul Ruskin, Rose Becker, Anita Dubin. There are a lot of people who are still around and active. But the dedication that...
May I ask you some questions before? And I'd
Surely.
love to end with our wonderful conversation with the dedication, because I think that that really brings to such a wonderful conclusion the pioneering role that you had in bringing Jewish life to Palm Springs. But you know, I know the two of you quite well, and I know that you didn't just do all this organizational work every day. So what did you do, for example, when the hot summers came? Did you leave?
Well,
Did you
fortunately, Stan had a very wise father who came from Hungary, and 100 years ago this year, he landed in Catalina Island. He had heard about it, and he had been in the States for a few years by then, and he wanted to find this paradise he'd heard about. And when he went over and looked, he agreed it was beautiful, and this is where he wanted to live. And he sold the business that he had established with a partner in Elsinore, and came over and started a little tiny business, a little saloon in those days, and then a restaurant and bowling alley, and established himself. And then he went back to Hungary and got his darling bride, Mother Rosin, and they proceeded on with their lives and at Catalina year-round, and they had 4 children. And when the oldest daughter, his sister Ethel, was old enough for a school after the 8th grade, there was no school there, so they moved to the mainland. And then they would summer every year, and they turned it over to someone else to run year-round until the boys were old enough, and Stan participated with his brothers. So we were lucky enough to go to Catalina, and I, in turn, not knowing them all that time, had gone to Catalina ever since I was a little girl, 4 years old, either for a few days or a week or whatever we could handle in those Depression years, or the hard years. And then we were married. So we would go to Catalina, where Stan operated the old family hotel, the Hermosa, which he did until 15 years ago. And we lived in the hotel the first year and for several years. And then after World War II, we purchased a home away from the hotel. And we now have a home there where, I think, 26 years ago we built it and adore it, high up on the mountaintop looking over that little bay. So we swam and we golfed, we had children, and we had picnics, and we do all the summer things that people do and love it.
Was there a movie theater in town during
Here?
this time? Of
Here?
Yes.
Yes,
Oh,
one.
yes. Earl Strebe, if you interview him, you'll learn a marvelous story about how he started the theaters here in Palm Springs. Actually, he was hired by Earl Kaufman to show films at the Desert Inn on Friday nights, I think, or something. And it became so popular that he decided to rent space at the Catherine Finchy School, just a block away from here, and show films there for the public. And he got a projector and had a screen, and that became the movie theater in town.
You know,
But we didn't go to
Yeah.
the theater except on a weekend when we hopefully were sold out here.
oh, I see.
But about the time we were married and we moved here, the Plaza Theater was just about to be built, and they built that beautiful theater there. And Earl Strebe really went into business. Of course, he had the Village Theater with his mother-in-law, Zadie Bunker, prior to that, and they ran both theaters. So there was that type of activity. There wasn't much else at night to do.
Oh, you'd go to the bowling alley if you
There was a
wanted to
bowling
play.
alley.
And you walked and you ate and you talked, and you didn't play cards and you didn't drink in those days. You just did the more simple activities.
Was there a lot of entertaining home to home?
No,
No,
there weren't.
we-
There are very few young people in the
There were
community.
so
The community was a retirement type of a community, and people who with wealth who could afford
But
winter vacations.
I've
So
always been grateful to those people, though, because
Oh, yes.
being a young couple, we were their babies. They were all old enough to be our grandparents, and they just took us under their wings, and we were entertained. And we were at their homes when they entertained, and I learned a great deal from them and their graciousness and their warmth. And they were very kind, and that was the only home entertaining. Or you'd go to one other's house and potluck it, or potato salad and hot dog type of evening, but there was no elegant, sophisticated
Well,
dining.
we're particularly grateful to the two of you. Certainly people
Oh.
of my family who have been members of the temple for 22 years. And I'd like very much if you would be kind enough to read the dedication
No,
that Stan wrote for this first book.
I'd be delighted. This is his dedication message. The newly erected Jewish Community Center building is a magnificent tribute to the Jewish people of Palm Springs. The erection of this building has more significance than just the provision of facilities for their religious comforts. It bespeaks the stalwart spirit and ardent devotion of a people to a cause, that of striving constantly for the betterment of their community, the fostering of higher education, and the encouragement of religious enlightenment. The world over, good people are religious people. Fundamentally, each and every one of these few Jewish families with the vision to foresee the need and the courage to build this religious edifice were prompted by a driving spirit within themselves. Not having had a spiritual leader is all the more reason for the community's wonderment at their accomplishment. May this temple serve to magnify that spirit and spread it among the peace-loving people of the earth. Stanley Rosin, President, 1948-1951.
I want to personally thank you, and on behalf of the Palm Springs Library and future generations, thanks again and again to Hermine and Stan Rosin.
It was our pleasure.
The pleasure.
Thank you.